Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Just to let you know, the format this afternoon is set as a webinar, so your cameras and microphones are automatically on mute. Hopefully you can hear me and see our panel, who I'll introduce you to shortly. Afternoon to those just joining us. Nice to have you with us this afternoon. I hope it's bearable where you are. Just talking to my colleagues down in London there, and I know it's certainly very warm there and in the Midlands, so hopefully you're coping with the heat okay. Just going to give it another 30 seconds or so before we commence. Just to let you know the format this afternoon, the platform has automatically put your profiles on mute and your cameras off, and it will remain that way. We will be recording the session once we get underway in a few moments, and the recording will be made available to you afterwards. Okay, super. I think we'll make a start. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. On behalf of New Leaf Health to this episode 3 of our Workplace Wellbeing panel discussions. The first 2 episodes, incidentally, we discussed neurodiversity and menopause and mental health. And if any of you weren't able to attend those but would like a copy of the recording, please drop me an email directly, which you can do via our marketing channels or through our website. Today, however, we're going to be discussing how to optimize performance in your workplace, which is quite a broad title. And we are talking about your people here rather than business goals, as you probably gather. Although it'll become quite clear as we go on why they're quite intrinsically linked, as I'm sure you're well aware. We're going to be taking a look at why well-being and performance are connected, and why it matters. And we're going to be looking at some practical ways that you can help your people be the best versions of themselves. And as many of you will recognise, workplace wellbeing strategy isn't just about what perks and benefits you offer and short-term initiatives. It's about investing in your people to get the best from them, and in return, obviously, benefiting the business. The burning questions lie around how to do that. And to help us answer those today, I'm joined by Victoria Perkins and Leo Pemberton. Victoria is a registered health coach, and is the education and training provider liaison lead for the UK and International Health Coaching Association. Health coaching experience across the NHS, digital health, multidisciplinary, easy for me to say, healthcare, as well as private practice and also workplace wellbeing, which is where our paths previously crossed. And she specialises in behaviour change, which will come into today's conversation. Leo joins us from a very warm London, I understand, is a registered dietitian and nutritionist with over 15 years experience working across primary and private healthcare. Some specialist areas include weight management, diabetes, cardiovascular health, as well as supporting weight loss medications, IBS, and also sports nutrition. He's a leader in running fitness for UK athletics as well. So both our panels are used to dealing with people to get the best performance from them. bringing obviously a wealth of knowledge across all kinds of different settings. And we're really pleased to have you both here today. Thanks for joining us. Before we start on the questions for you, I promise I won't grill you too much, although we've had a great response from the attendees that join us today. I've got a question for the audience, and we're going to run a couple of these polls as we go through the session this afternoon. So you should very shortly see a pop-up box on your screen, which is asking you a question and some multiple choice answers. If you could just populate that with what speaks to you. So which of the following best describes your organisation's current approach to employee wellbeing? And there's a couple of options there, and we'll have a look at those in a moment. And as I say, we'll be asking a couple of these questions as we go through, and the conversation will hopefully flow as a result. So we'll get the results in just a second. And yeah, quite clearly streaking ahead, unsurprisingly, is a mix of reactive and preventative, which is great to see, actually. So there's always a balance with these things, and listening as well as coming up with initiatives is brilliant. So our discussion today is going to be based around these, but also from the questions that you submitted when you registered. Now, there's going to be a Q&A section right at the end. So if there's anything that we haven't covered, please feel free to pop questions into the Q&A as we go along, and we'll come to those questions at the end. But let's get into it. Really good place to start and set the scene is asking the title of this session: what does optimized performance really mean? And actually, we're going to go straight to the audience first, so to launch another poll. So in your organisation, is wellbeing generally seen as connected to performance or as a separate issue? And this will very clearly link into our first discussion topic from the panel. So if you could populate those for me, and then we'll look at the results in just a second, that would be brilliant. And yeah, again, we're seeing some movement from the assembled group. So actually quite a lot of movement. Just give that another second. It's actually shifted quite a lot there. Okay, so the majority of people, 61%, are saying it's somewhat connected, but not consistently. And Victoria, coming to you first, perhaps you could give us your views on this. What is the link between employee wellbeing and performance? And it seems like that's a bit misunderstood sometimes. Is it a trade-off? Is it an either-or? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. That's a great question. And I just wanted to start first by caveating that my responses really come from a place of experience and observation from my working and health coaching role in workplaces of all varieties. And so I've definitely learned that one size doesn't fit all, and that an open ear, we have that open ear, we get better. So firstly, I was really pleased to see the great questions that Sam got, that you submitted to Sam before today. And it really does demonstrate that you're all ears here today. So that was, a really great place to start. But just to answer the question, what is the link between employee wellbeing and sustained performance? And why is this often misunderstood as an either as a trade, either or, it's a trade-off? And I would say that I think that when health and wellbeing initiatives are seen as a benefit or an add-on or a nice to have, we can really miss an opportunity. And we can miss an opportunity to put health and wellbeing at the core, foundations of performance and foundations of performance outcome. So that is to build capability, not dependability. And so it's not about looking at resilience as grit, but about the ability to adapt, that skill, the skill that one needs, that they grow and they grow as they use it and develop their confidence. And also, I think we need to look at ourselves, all of us sitting in the room here. We're also navigating our health and wellbeing day in and day out. We don't leave our work when we go home. We don't leave our person when we enter back into the office. So really to start from the place that we need to be in the best place to be work ready, I think is really key.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, that and certainly that thing about bringing your whole self to work, and like you say, meeting yourself where you are, and start, that's your start point, isn't it? Leo, just to bring you in here, I know obviously, like Victoria, you've worked alongside teams and organisations. What does it look like when an organisation gets this right in terms of giving their people the best opportunity to be their best selves? How can they do that?
Yeah, well, we visit companies of all sizes, all shapes and sizes, all across the UK, and there is a huge variation. But I would say that the companies that get it right look at all of the teams within their organization and all of the levels, because there can be a huge difference between office-based or admin or support staff-based teams and those who are working in a warehouse, for example, where there might be more shift patterns and other opportunities for intervention there to look after people. So we really do see a great variety. More recently, I think people are also investing a bit more in mental health. So if a company has a mental health first aider or a team of mental health first aiders, early intervention with that, it's not about having someone on hand for when there's an emergency or a mental health crisis. It might be just a case of having an early conversation about how things are going outside of work, not just within the workplace. So I think early intervention can look like that in a mentor-mentee relationship within a team as well. Just checking in on someone, that early intervention doesn't need to be a huge awareness campaign or celebrating, blood pressure awareness week or similar. And those are really valid initiatives, but it can just be that people have someone to approach within their team or organization. Conversations I've had recently with teams are, my stress levels are really high because we're having a restructure at the moment. And then, the next person I saw from that team said exactly the same thing. I am really stressed at the moment because there's a restructure happening and I don't know what's going to happen next. But some of that reassurance can come from within the business, I would say. And then just a lot of the health screening that we do in the workplace, the feedback that we often get, and these appointments are quite short. It's like 15, 20 minutes of doing a mini health check in the workplace. We hear stories all the time. People will say, I haven't seen my GP since 2019, not since pre-COVID. Oh, I didn't know that this was happening with my health. My GP has never explained it in this way. Thank you so much. So those kind of interventions can really save, sickness days further down the line or things moving into more of a crisis. So yeah, there's a real, there are lots of different opportunities out there, I would say, for workplaces to invest. But early intervention is key rather than crisis management. And that's the same with performance.
Yeah, brilliant. Very much so. Another question that came in, which I think possibly goes along those lines, is about what role psychological safety plays in enabling people to perform at their best. And again, that's quite sort of environment specific, isn't it? Depending on the teams that they're in. Any thoughts or anything that you'd like to offer in sort of answer to that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of businesses, sadly, the stories we hear about mental health, psychological safety is often the conversations are happening too late, and people can be very scared to speak up about their own psychological safety. I think anyone who's been through the mental health first aider training will be really well equipped to have those conversations and reassurance, because that is something that is covered quite extensively. But again, it doesn't have to be that one intervention. Again, it's just checking in with people, and more of a holistic approach, because if you have a conversation with your manager or supervisor and that person says at the end of the conversation, just to check how are things outside of work, is everything going okay, opens up that opportunity for someone to just say that things are going on. People have quite complicated lives. They might be hybrid working, so really torn between family and work life, and the lines have become quite blurred. So yeah, I think psychological safety needs to be looked at across teams, whether they're fully office based or remote, or again, if they're working in a warehouse versus office based. So yeah.
Thank you. Victoria, is there anything you'd like to add? I think that Leo is quite comprehensive there, but I'm sure you have a view.
Yeah, I think what Leo said there was all if we see everyone's faces, there'd be lots of nodding going around. It's the culture, isn't it? It's the culture that you can actually speak up, because often Leo and I hear that. You hear it in good scenarios and positive scenarios and less positive scenarios. And sometimes the results, actually, the outcome in terms of those health checks can actually be quite black and white. So yes, to enable psychological safety, you actually have to have the culture for it to even start. So that might be role modeling. But I think we'll come into that a bit later.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you for that. What a great start. So we're starting to see here that performance is absolutely linked to well-being. I'm going to ask another question of the audience at this point with another poll, fingers at the ready. The question being, and this came up quite a lot in your questions to us, what's the biggest reason employees in your organisation don't prioritise their own well-being? And there's some options there that we thought, but it could be, and we'll come on to it, it could be that it's something else completely. So really interested to see where this leads us. And the responses are coming in. I'll just give it another few seconds. Yeah, I think we could have possibly predicted that, but the probably the biggest reason, and certainly 60% of the audience are saying they don't have time. So employees aren't prioritising because they've got a million and one other things on their to-do list, as many of us do. So staying on this topic then, we're going to talk a little bit about empowering employees to manage their own well-being. So we've established the time factor. Leo, coming to you, how can we shift that narrative around self-care, particularly in professions or roles where staff are used to putting others first? That was a particular question, but just in general, how can we start to shift this perception around looking after yourself?
Yeah, I think sometimes the interventions can be quite small and have a massive impact. So if, for example, you have a workforce where people drive to work, sit at the desk, drive home, and are very sedentary, that has a massive effect on their health. But if that's a theme within an organization, just encouraging people to take time away from their desk at lunchtime and having that protected time to go for a walk or organize a walking group. I mean, the company I was working at yesterday had beautiful grounds, and a lot of the team would buddy up and have a walk, through the woods nearby at lunchtime and get away. And most of them were driving to and from work. So those kind of encouraging that within teams, that's just an example of a small intervention. But understanding where people might be and the pressures that they have, both within their own role and all of the pressures of home life, young family, sleep deprivation, social media. Just it is about looking at the individual as well as the entire workforce. So it's not, I wouldn't pretend that it's easy, and we're quite privileged that we get to have one-to-one conversations with employees all the time and find out what's really going on for them. but those conversations can happen within the workforce. So I think it's setting that time aside within those supervisor or leader conversations that happen with employees to check in on welfare and encourage good behaviour, without penalty. So encouraging people to go out at lunchtime, encouraging people to leave on time, those can have a huge benefit overall.
Yeah, that was certainly thinking back to my early career and jobs I've had. There are workplaces where, hopefully not so much now, but where taking an extended lunch break just was absolutely not happening. Going out at lunchtime even was just not a culture. And as you say, when you're driving to and from work, sitting all day, that's really not a good practice for a day, is it really? From any perspective, thinking about even posture and things like that, you're sitting all day. It's not good for your body, is it? We weren't designed to do that. Victoria, just bringing you in terms of, I know you're also massively into your fitness and activity. So what practical tools or resources might help employees take ownership? So what can we give them as an introduction, if you like, to sort of taking ownership of their well-being?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Leo was saying, we actually, it was the poll that's saying people say they don't have time. And, starting from that very point, that mindset, I don't have time, or worrying what people might think if I do take time, even coming to the health checks that Leo and I do, sometimes I've got to get back to a meeting, and it can't depend. It's like, no, this is your time at the moment to really, you chose to sign up to this today, and, let's make it powerful in terms of, what you're going to get out of it. So it's that, again, it's that culture, setting the culture in the first place, that it is right to make sure that you are in a fit and healthy place to be able to perform. That looking after themselves is going to help them flourish. To understand what matters to them most, what for them to ask the questions, what's getting in the way, and get them, often when even in a 10-minute session, I'll be saying, what one small thing change could you make today? Just take that bite, take that opportunity, because they've signed up, they're thinking, okay, what next? Sometimes we do need to just take those small steps. I am aware that if information leaflets and talks were all we needed to cure the health and wellbeing issues in the world, and we wouldn't all be here, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So sometimes I think it's thinking less about tools and resources, which absolutely do have their supportive role. It needs to be alongside activation. And, and that is really about getting the conversation going. And how can we do that? And a couple of the questions, the sort of theme that came through of the questions that came through today was, how do you get people to actually take up these initiatives? And, for starters, you hear that, it's got to feel that safe space that we were talking about earlier, that actually they feel safe to join, they feel safe to speak up. That by doing so, they're being strong and they're being progressive because they're speaking up. And so from the employer's point of view, it's about saying, well, you don't actually need to have all the answers. You just need to ask better questions about, what do your employees need? And we do this when we see people around us leading the way. So it's not about HR sending out more messages. It's about maybe because your colleague has done it. And actually, I often see that. I might not be booked up in the afternoon, but when they've gone back to their desk and said, I've just had these conversations, and all of a sudden my afternoon's fully booked up, because actually people think, oh, actually, I'm going to get some value out of this. And that's better than me walking around the office and saying, I've got blank feet, who wants to come and book up? It's their own trusted employee, their team that they work with. And sometimes it's nicely done with a thing. So it can be the employee going back to their desk talking about their results, or it can be done with an item, I don't know, like a flower or something, and you come back to your desk with a flower, and your colleagues around you go, oh, where did you get that from? Starts the conversation. Or the flower is sitting on your desk, and someone says, oh, that's a nice flower. It's an opening conversation, it's an opening gambit, and it's not sort of top down. It's the community talking about these are the conversations we're able to have. It is a safe space, and it's really making a difference.
That's fantastic. I like that idea. How lovely. Leo, just thinking about the people that are on this call today, they're obviously looking for ways that they can influence what goes on in their workplaces. If someone's thinking about setting up perhaps a staff wellbeing network or some sort of initiative, something like Victoria's just outlined, perhaps, how do they create something that's going to engage people? Engagement was a big question, wasn't it, that came through. Is there anything that you think is a little nugget that we might pass on in that subject?
Yeah, I think engage staff from the offset with that conversation. So find out, by conducting an internal poll or questionnaire about what people would like from a wellbeing initiative, so that, again, maybe linking back to what Victoria was saying, that it's not something that's dictated from top down, it's with the involvement of the work community. Because I don't know, we hear that a lot. People say, oh, we heard that the team were saying that, they're really interested in gut health at the moment, or we want to do something to raise men's health awareness. We're aware that, a couple of the male employees have had quite serious health issues in recent months. So the team are talking about it and talking about prevention. And I think with early planning, you can really create something with meaning. Some of the companies we work at, they have biannual health weeks, health awareness weeks. So they'll start an intervention early, plan in various activities for that week. And I think it's the small things, again, that can lead to really regular activities within the workforce. And that's team bonding as well, which links into performance. So I don't know if it's a charity initiative that everybody's doing, they're working towards 1 million steps collectively. When we hear of teams doing that, the positivity with which they speak about that sort of activity, and they can get really competitive, and it's a real, like I say, a team bonding experience. But first and foremost, I think it is about listening to people and what they would like, because it gives people an opportunity to say, we've never covered menopause awareness. A lot of people in the office are talking about it. It's a hot topic. What can we put together? So, involve the teams and plan ahead, and do something with meaning. And like Victoria said, when there is someone within the team, when we visit and we're running a clinic for the day, where there's someone really proactive talking to the team about it, we have a full clinic every time, because we've had someone running around spreading the word for us with enthusiasm, and that's where you get sadly, that's where we get, we find out that people have high blood pressure, and we can direct them to their GP, or there are lots of things that people are currently not seeing their GP about, because they either can't feel it, or they simply haven't visited their GP for a long time. So for us, that's the real reward, is when we discover that, someone really does need to be signposted or have an intervention, because that's exactly why we do what we do. It's not just to look after the worried well, it's to hopefully catch people before things become too serious.
Yeah, the worried well. It's something that we're quite aware of at events that we do. Very often, as you say, you promote an event that puts something on, and it's the people that are already health conscious that come along, and actually the people you want to get to might shy away a little bit. So I really like that idea, engaging the staff and going, what works for you? What would you like? Rather than assuming. I think that's really good. Victoria, anything you'd like to add on that point in terms of engagement?
Sort of meeting them where they're at in terms of what they recognize. So, as Leo was saying, bringing in topics that are in their newspaper that morning, so what's being talked about over breakfast, weight loss drugs, those sorts of things. People, it's those sorts of conversations, a B-lister, A-lister, somebody that's something that's going on. Use them as opportunities, because that's what people are worried about. That's what they're talking about. So those not the worried well, those who are kind of might normally shy away from it, just might, their ears might prick up a little bit about, because that's just the narrative. That's what's going on, day in, day out. I think that's really key. Is I often call it sort of finger on the pulse. What's in the newspaper this week? What are people worried about? Because quite often, whether you're a shift worker, an office worker, or wherever you are, we're all people, and we're all faced with, whether it's our loved ones or whether it's us. And often, and Leo and I would agree, we've said this in the past, it doesn't actually matter where you are in the office. We're just human beings, and we want best, we want joy, we want love, and I think it is about just listening to what it is that people might be worried about, and then designing what you offer around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Some really great points made there, and the benefit of having that human intervention that's not an app, and it's not a digital this or a printed resource is just invaluable, isn't it? Okay, so time for another poll. We're going to move on to the subject of support in a moment. So in that vein, the question we're asking this time is around what support you offer within your organisation. So how effective do you feel your current EAP or professional support offer is for your frontline or emotionally demanding roles? But actually that could mean any role, couldn't it? Because they're all fairly emotionally demanding roles in a workplace. So if you want to populate that with your answers, that would be great. And we'll have a look at what the results read. And panel, I'm sure you'll agree, Leo and Victoria, I think this might divide opinion a little bit, because some organisations' EAPs are excellent. Some have been put in place, and certainly there's an opportunity to build around them. So it'd be interesting to see whether the question of effectiveness is how that's perceived by people. So we'll have a look at the results now. Okay, so it's a little closer on this one, actually, I think. So somewhat effective, but with gaps. I think that's a fair response. And then at 28%, oh, shifted again, 26% say very effective, which is really good to hear, isn't it? And I think a good EAP is put in place with almost consultation, like we were just talking about. So yeah, somewhat effective with gaps is coming in at 45%, so not quite half of the audience. So talking about support then, Victoria, a great question for you here. What's the difference between reactive and preventative support? And why does that matter?
Yeah. There is a difference. Reactive is sometimes absolutely necessary, and it has its place. But preventative is about the employee becoming more confident and skilled at managing their health and well-being. So essentially, they need services so that they are energized and creative and present, engaged, so they're performing. And so going back to what I was saying earlier, there's this capability, this workplace readiness going on here, rather than developing some sort of dependency as they go forward. So it's really about, putting into place that ability to develop those skills around that.
Excellent, thank you. Leo, coming to you now. So we that question was around sort of frontline or emotionally demanding roles. Do you think so? How can organisations better support those employees? Sometimes things like EAP counselling isn't quite enough, is it? What's your thoughts around that?
I think, and EAP certainly has its place and can work really well, but then sometimes, it's not palming it off, but then it takes it outside of the organization. Whereas the interventions that you can stage within the organization, I mean, obviously I'm biased, I'm a dietitian, but when we're working on site with either frontline staff or either factories or warehouses, those sorts of environments, often what people tell us is, there's a canteen here, we're in the middle of nowhere and I can't make any healthy food choices. And a lot of the time they're right, and that sort of provision can be really helpful, because people who are working shift patterns already, and especially night shifts, for example, not to go on a tangent, but they can really be have incredibly disrupted sleep, which affects their hormones. That can affect their weight. Weight management can be a lot harder for people who work night shifts. So looking at those populations specifically within an organization and giving a better offer, again, it goes back to asking the employees. So if you conduct a poll and your team say there are no healthy food choices on site, I can't always bring a lunch in with me, means that you can stage those interventions, because we have worked with companies who've made those changes, and employee well-being undoubtedly goes up as a result of those interventions.
Yeah, good to know. Interesting, thank you. Just kind of moving on slightly, but it is connected. A specific question now, and I'll come to both of you, but Victoria, for you first. How can HR or managers best identify when an employee needs some specific support before it becomes a crisis? So obviously we talked about mental health first aid. Is it any suggestions about how they can navigate that?
I think it goes back to that foundations that we were talking about earlier, the culture, the foundations, that actually the creating that safe space for the employee to speak up early. So, if they are, able to, they feel that they're able to speak, and the questions that are being asked are, they're not so much what's wrong, it's more how are things going, how can I help? So it's and you really are available to listen, and Leo, you mentioned this earlier, whether it's virtual or in the office. So Leo and I see people all, whether they're in an office 5 days a week, 2 days a week, behind a screen. We've really the manager or HR just needs to be aware about that adaptability and have those sort of the listening ears. And I think you all do, because you're here, and you're looking for ways to grow, but it's really right from day one. It's that being listening, being available, but really available for somebody, and so that they know that actually they can come to you because you have created the open door. The door is open for somebody to come and speak, and I think it's key.
And I suppose that it's a bit of a tricky question, but what about those people that find it difficult to come forward, but you can tell they're struggling? Any advice for a manager there?
Again, I would say that if it's a constant reassurance about fact that that I am available, because you might not get it in that moment. But sometimes people do need a bit of time to develop trust in somebody. Maybe they've had a bad experience in the past. Maybe their fear of being told off, those sorts of things. We've all got that hang up from growing up, in school days, and it's about from day one about developing that trust. And if you know that somebody's maybe not a big speaker and everything, is just by bit making sure that they see this open face, and it's silent sometimes as well when you're speaking. It's not constantly telling them what to do, it's giving them opportunity to speak. And it might be in those conversations, as I said, a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, but it's how can I help? Is there something that if you were to do your be 10% better at your job that you were doing, what is it that you'd need to do? You know, give them some real nuggets to be able to open questions, to be able to answer it. But if it's just sort of, oh, you seem a little bit down, what's wrong? That person's going to go back into their shell. So it's really, you know, really showing them that it is okay, okay to speak. But you know, we sometimes have to give people that time to get there, to develop trust.
Yeah, I see that definitely. Leo, I could see you nodding away there. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, and I suppose I would say to everyone on the call as well, you know, make sure that you're looking after yourselves as well before, you know, it can be very difficult within organizations if everybody is overstretched and stressed to then be that caring person or mentor within a team. So that's something to be aware of. You know, we all need to look after ourselves to look after other people. But yeah, I think like Victoria was saying, encouraging conversations all of the time. And you know, when someone who is struggling feels they can come forward, if you've been there regularly for them, or if your team meetings or your one-to-ones are formatted in a way where people can speak freely and open up without reproach, then they will be much more open to coming to you if they are struggling. So yeah, I think it's all of that open communication around well-being that creates that atmosphere where people feel they can speak freely.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Some quite deep discussion points there, really important ones to take away. Thank you. I'm a massive advocate of mental health first aiders. We train a lot of them in the workforce, and I think as an additional support in a workplace or an organisation, I think they're invaluable. Moving on to a more positive note, we've talked about support and helping people be the best version of themselves. I'm going to go to the audience again with a poll. What would help your employees feel most confident about making those positive choices about their well-being? So in your opinion, what do you think would be the most help to help them make those positive choices? And we'll see what that throws up. Oh gosh, straight away. And I think I thought that might be the case. Victoria touched on this earlier, didn't she? So I'll give it just a second to see if that moves any, but I don't think it's going to go. Oh, maybe. Okay, I think we've leveled a little bit. So 47%, not quite half, are saying seeing managers visibly model healthy behaviours. I think that's a huge one, isn't it? It's just gone up to 50%. And then at 25%, we talked about trust. More trust that seeking help won't be held against them. So that, again, it's that psychological safety thing, isn't it? Making it a safe environment to have those conversations. Amazing. Thank you. And thank you, audience. I think going with the building confidence theme, Leo, thinking about the result of that poll there, what do you think would help employees overcome those barriers to sort of being their best selves, being well?
I think it's coming from work-life balance, you know, and organizations. I think, you know, Victoria touched on this briefly, but sometimes where we have organizations where, in fact, Sam, you mentioned it as well in your previous workplaces, where you were working extremely long hours, or maybe lunches away from the desk weren't encouraged. A lot of other things can be impacted from that. So there's a ripple effect. And performance ultimately will be damaged by that. It's not really a proactive environment, and taking time away and having quality time at home and away from work, or delineating your working from home hours from your home life can be really important in terms of bringing your best self to work. So encouraging those kind of behaviours across all of the teams is really important, I think, because it's a false economy to overwork people, or keep people in the office for long hours or beyond their contracted week. So it's just looking at the bigger picture really, and involving people in wellbeing initiatives, I think.
Thank you, Victoria. Just picking up a thread there that Leo mentioned about remote workers or hybrid workers. That's massive now, isn't it? And sometimes if you're not in the office every day, you can feel a bit disconnected from what's going on in terms of well-being in your environment. Any tips about how we can kind of bring that together? So those workers that aren't in the office all the time, making them feel a part of it. Any tips you might impart?
I think yeah, I mean, the point is it can be quite isolating working from home, and I think in addition to isolating, boundaryless, if that's even a word, managing a team sitting in front of you opposite desk or at home still needs consistency, conversations, and to know that you can pick up a phone, or that it's okay to make a call. We have to develop these behaviors, that it's okay. Sometimes it feels, if you had a colleague sitting opposite, you could just say, oh, could I just ask a question? It feels more intrusive to give them a Teams call and bing, bing, bing in their ear, and that can feel, and it's about, creating, I always think it's always about creating expectations up front. Yeah. So being, that both sides know what is okay, making those boundaries so that, everyone, you're not crossing them as well, because that's not fair as well, where there's no, if you work from home, there's no such thing as time off. And then the employee might then feel a little bit like they don't really know what is acceptable. So, being really clear about that. And, just, I would go back to the managerial role. It's, you don't need to know the answers all the time. I think that's, when we were talking about, something came to my mind when we were talking about crisis. We always feel like we need to know the answers, but actually we need to remember that people are really resourceful. And actually, when we give them a chance to just speak out what's not working for them, and what help they need, and really listen to it, we have an opportunity to give a really genuinely supportive response. So I think we need to not forget that as a managerial role, we're just telling what to do all the time. Take that responsibility off yourself and remember that individuals really do have it within them.
Yeah, brilliant. I really like that, and I think you bang on with that, definitely. It's tricky, isn't it, Leo? Thinking about manager support, particularly if your team's remote. Just thinking about as well, one of the things that came up in a question is things like how to deal with difficult conversations in a way that still helps that trust relationship. So say perhaps sickness or absence, or a sensitive policy breach or something like that. Any tips around that at all?
Yes, well, tread carefully, because obviously those conversations can be difficult. But yeah, being approachable first and foremost, and then getting to, I suppose, the crux of what's happening is really key. And like Victoria said, meeting people where they're at. So if there is, I think you have to focus on the individual. So we see themes that might not always be acknowledged or considered within a team or within a manager-employee relationship. So, a parent returning to work from maternity or paternity leave, sleep deprived, a lot going on, massive change at home, would be in a very different situation to someone who's approaching retirement, where they might have higher satisfaction levels. And there's, succession planning going on, and winding down, people can feel less useful within the organization or insecure about someone else taking over their role and then gradually handing over. So I think it really is about focusing on the individual and acknowledging what problems they might be experiencing. We see a lot of, one thing that I think is a real positive from the last few years is that when we're talking to younger employees, I'm generalizing slightly here, but they seem to be much more open about mental health challenges, and that's really refreshing. And I'm glad there is that change, that people feel more comfortable to have those conversations or to open up about their own mental health. So I think difficult conversations do focus on that individual and not just read from a company script. Do listen to what's actually going on, because you might have a much more positive outcome at the end of that conversation. It's not just reading something that's pre-scripted or going into a meeting thinking that you already know the outcomes. It's a two-way conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Victoria, anything you'd like to add there around that conversation dilemma?
Yeah, I was just nodding. It is that kind of, you don't need to know the answers. If it's a difficult conversation, sometimes actually not saying very much, and letting that person have the floor, and giving them the opportunity to say, I'm here, I'm ready. Is sometimes I think we can talk too much, and we make the conversation more difficult than it needs to be.
Yes, thank you. Really insightful now. I'm conscious we're coming to the end of our time together, and I'd like to get some questions in if we can. Just a final section about recognising and removing common barriers. So we talked a little bit about this before. Victoria, just a brief kind of synopsis. What do you think the most common barriers are to prevent employees engaging with what support's available to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of run the thread through here, is that I see two key barriers. One is it relevant, and do I trust it? So, people can be a little unsure about what well-being actually is. They know that they want more energy. They know that they want to stick to an exercise plan, to eat more healthily, to feel on top of their finances. They do, but we need to connect their priorities to be able to meet them where they're at, as Leo was saying. And a gym membership might not be the starting point for someone who has very little confidence in their body, or is struggling with poor sleep and can't even imagine the idea of going to the gym. So that's really about that relevance piece. So it has to be built from the real need that comes from listening to the person. And then the other one is the trust. Yes. So this is really key. They need to feel safe. They need to truly feel that this is considered a strength to reach out, to engage for support, that it is truly confidential, and that we remove that fear of failure, that judgment. Why can't I cope on my own, or will my employer know what's going on for me? So relevance, and then in safety, it's that is it that this is actually part of performance development, and it's not about pulling me down.
Yeah, brilliant. Leo, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd say that the happiest companies that we visit are where people feel cared for genuinely, and that is obviously a difficult thing to define, because cultures vary across organizations. But certainly we know when we step into a happy office, and then we get that one-to-one time with people, and it's great to hear when people say, I feel really cared for at work. And a couple of weeks ago, I was working at a company where they were having health screening on site for the first time. They're a relatively new company, but so many of the team said, this is brilliant. I can't believe I'm having this done at work. I can just walk 10 meters from my desk and have a health check, and I've not been to my doctor in 4 years. So people like to feel cared for, and I think that feeds into a lot of what we've talked about today, really, in terms of that holistic approach.
Yeah, very much so. there were some questions that came in around sort of specific needs that are often overlooked, and menopause was one of them, but there's obviously others. Obviously, Victoria, just coming to you, that there's a change in the law coming, isn't there, next year, which sort of takes that into account. How can organisations kind of bring that in, if you like, to their well-being strategy, if they have one, or if they're thinking about creating one, those often overlooked needs?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would say it's again about listening to people, what they need. And that comes from the fact that we are all whole people. We're whole people with whole people issues. Humans are wonderfully complicated, and we ebb and flow in terms of the areas that we need support. So, the issues that are coming up for your employees, when thinking about, offering them general support, might relate to them at certain points of time, but it might not even be them. I mean, you mentioned menopause. That doesn't have to be exclusive to just women. I mean, I did a women's health workshop where 30% of the audience were men, and they were the ones who came and asked me questions afterwards because they had a loved one who was female. And I think we shouldn't just put things into a silo and just think that we're just meeting that population. I talked about that earlier, about what is going on around the kitchen table, what are the conversations that people are having, because that's real time, that's affecting them. But we also do need to look at the big picture of the whole person. So we are not just what we eat and how we move and sleep and our stress. We are our spirituality, we're our friendships, we're our loneliness, we're our relationships, whether it's our work colleagues or our teenage child, or our mother-in-law. We all are these different. We're just very complicated, and we sometimes we need to respect that, and we need to support people to be adaptable to life changing, because Leo talked about whether there's a new child in the house, or maybe you'll suddenly become a carer at a point in your life where so many things are going on for you. And what we need to do is just support people to become adaptable, capable to deal with. I often talk about sort of peaking, as life comes at her, not to be sort of totally bowled over by it, to have the skills to actually two things. One is to put your hand up and say, I can't do this, I really need support. And the other one is to actually go, oh, I've done this before in a different scenario, and I can adapt, I can make some changes here, and then move forward. So I think that that it's just about recognizing the whole person.
Brilliant, thank you. Really, really nicely put. Just before I move on to the final poll, there's no questions in the Q&A at the moment. I think hopefully we've been that efficient that we've covered everyone's queries that came in. If there are any questions that you'd like to pose to the panel, there's an opportunity now. Pop it into the Q&A box for me. You'll see the little icon at the top of the screen there, or in the chat box. And we're happy to put them to the panel in the closing minutes. But just a final question for the audience. I think you'll agree it's been a fantastic discussion, some very common themes coming through. But what's your single biggest takeaway from the panel discussion so far? As I said, we'll do a Q&A as well. And there's some options there, so keen to hear what people have to say about that. Just as we close down the session. Just give it a little while longer to get some responses. Oh, we've got a hung jury. Okay, so it's literally splits quite. Oh, and we're moving again. Okay, all right. Okay, I think we'll land on that. So there's a couple actually. So in terms of the biggest takeaway, there's a couple of people saying 27% actually, it's moving again. 33%, I need to address barriers facing frontline or remote or embedded staff. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? We've talked about that quite a bit in terms of keeping the conversation open, making them feel included, alongside exploring preventative rather than reactive support. That's great, that message has got across. And a better understanding of the wellbeing performance link generally. That's good to know as well, as I think we've hopefully imparted, you know, that the whole person is who we're talking to, not just the person doing that role. So thank you, panel. I'm just going to go to the chat to see if there's any final questions. I don't think there are. So on that note, thank you so much for joining us, Victoria and Leo, and for your input. Hopefully the people that attended today have had their questions answered. Your contributions have been brilliant. Really value your time. Thank you very much for joining us. And to the attendees today from various organisations, thank you very much. You'll receive a copy of the recording of the session and some contact information on there as well. If you've anything that you'd like to pick up and run with, we can certainly help you with that. We'll be running another session of the panel discussion in September. We'll let you take a little break for the summer. And we'd like to hear from you about what that topic is. So if there's something that you think you'd like to see explored, we've got a wealth of experience that we can call on to bring a panel in. So do let us know if there's anything you'd like to talk about. These sessions are all about your contributions. Victoria, Leo, thank you, and to the audience, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you in September. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Some lovely comments. Thank you very much.